You're too young. Too small. This isn't a game. That's what Sergeant Ethan McCall told her. A 9-year-old girl, wearing oversized boots and hand-stitched camo, had just asked to take the shot. He scoffed. The crowd chuckled. Then she lay down, took aim, and did the unthinkable. 1, 2, 3 moving targets. Each hit center mass, from 500 yards, in shifting wind. Without flinching, silence fell. Because that wasn't just a shot, it was a statement. And in that moment, a child didn't just hit the bullseye, she shattered every expectation in sight. Before we dive into this unforgettable moment, let us know where you're tuning in from. If stories of courage, respect, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button. We've got another powerful story dropping tomorrow. Let's get started. The wind swept across the dusty fields of Hillside Base in Wyoming as families wandered through the annual Community Military Day. Children squealed with delight at climbing tanks, while veterans swapped stories with young recruits. But standing alone near the edge of the shooting range was Sergeant Ethan McCall, a grizzled 59-year-old with steel gray hair, a rigid back, and eyes that had seen more deserts than dreams. Ethan wasn't one for small talk. After 2 decades serving in the Middle East, he'd buried both comrades and illusions. To him, the army wasn't a playground, it was a crucible that separated the strong from the soft. And in his mind, today's youth, all thumbs and screen time. No grit. He watched the crowd with arms folded, nodding politely but never smiling. The simulation range was his domain, 500 yards, shifting winds, and pressure no teenager could fake their way through. But he had no idea that this seemingly ordinary day, filled with funnel cakes and flag-waving families, was about to shake the foundation of everything he believed, all because of a quiet little girl in mismatched boots and homemade camo. The laughter echoed around the training field like dust kicked up by boots. A group of young cadets had gathered, showing off at the simulation shooting range. Sergeant Ethan McCall kept his eyes narrowed as they lined up shaky stances, overconfident smirks. Just as he turned to correct one recruit's grip, a small voice cut through the banter. "Sir, may I try?" The voice didn't belong to any cadet. It came from a young girl no older than 9, standing just beyond the ropes. Her oversized combat boots clunked with every step, and her camouflage jacket, clearly hand-stitched, hung off her small shoulders. A frayed cap shadowed most of her face, but her eyes gleamed with quiet resolve. Ethan chuckled, just loud enough for a few soldiers nearby to join in. "This isn't Call of Duty, sweetheart," he said, half smiling. 500 yards isn't something you do with luck. But she didn't flinch. The girl Amelia gave a slight nod, then looked toward an older man seated quietly nearby. He wore a faded Vietnam sniper badge and sat with the kind of posture only a soldier carries for life. That was Walter Dempsey, a name Ethan hadn't heard in decades, but one etched in military legend. "Let her," Walter said calmly. "She's not here to play." Ethan hesitated. A crowd had begun to form. Letting a child handle a training rifle wasn't protocol, but this was a non-lethal simulation model designed for precision, not power. With a sigh and a raised eyebrow, he waved her in. Amelia stepped forward, took position, and to Ethan's surprise, adjusted the rifle like she'd done it 100 times. She tested the weight, lowered her body into a stable prone position, and raised a scrap of paper, holding it gently to measure the wind. The cadets quieted. Even Ethan stopped breathing. Crack! The sound was clean. On the monitor, the red dot appeared dead center. Bullseye. A perfect shot at 500 yards. The silence was immediate and complete. No one moved. Ethan walked stiffly toward the digital screen, double-checking the data. No glitches, no errors. It was real. He turned back to Amelia, who had already disarmed the rifle and was stepping away like nothing happened. "You taught her?" he asked Walter, voice hoarse. The old sniper nodded. Taught her to breathe. Taught her to think. Taught her that pulling the trigger means more than hitting a mark. For the first time in years, Ethan felt his confidence waver. This wasn't just skill, it was legacy, and the girl in homemade camo had just rewritten the rules of his world. Before Ethan could fully process what had just happened, a voice cut through the murmurs of disbelief. It was Captain Reed, one of the highest-ranking officers at Hillside Base, who had been observing quietly from the sidelines. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant McCall." He called. "Let's see if this young lady is ready for the advanced trial." Ethan turned, startled. "Sir, the Tier 3 simulation test that's designed for our elite sharpshooters." Captain Reed gave a slow nod. "Exactly. But I saw enough. Let's find out what else she can do." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Even the cadets looked uneasy. The test had stumped fully trained soldiers. It required the shooter to hit 3 separate targets moving at different speeds, at staggered distances, with wind conditions changing unpredictably every 5 seconds. Amelia looked up at her grandfather, who was now standing beside her. Walter rested a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do anything, kiddo," he said gently. "You've already proven your worth. But if you feel it, if you want to let them see what I've always known." She nodded, not in defiance, not for pride, but with quiet conviction. She stepped onto the platform again. The atmosphere changed. Even the wind seemed to pause. The digital range whirred to life. Target 1, 350 yards. Left to right sweep. Target 2, 500 yards. Dipping and rising. Target 3, 425 yards. Stutter speed. Reverse motion. She lay flat, adjusted the simulation rifle, and once again lifted her crumpled wind check paper. Her lips moved silently. A breath in. A pause. "Crack! Target 1 down." The onlookers gasped. She didn't blink, adjusted. "Crack! Target 2 hit, mid-swing." Now people were holding their breath. Amelia inhaled again, adjusted for the shifting crosswind, and exhaled slowly. "Crack! Target 3, clean shot through the center ring." The field erupted. Veterans with folded arms now clapped with pride. Recruits who had once sneered now shouted her name. Someone snapped a picture. Another saluted. But Sergeant Ethan McCall didn't move. He simply walked toward Amelia and bent slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. "You're the real deal," he whispered. "I've spent a lifetime teaching soldiers to steady their aim. But today, I learned how to steady my heart." Amelia gave a small smile, then returned to Walter's side. And for the first time in years, Ethan turned toward the base's flagpole and saluted not the stars and stripes, but the future. That night, the training grounds of Hillside Base sat in eerie stillness. The dust had settled, the laughter faded, and the echoes of applause dissolved into silence. But Sergeant Ethan McCall lingered alone at the shooting range, staring into the distance where the digital targets had once danced. His thoughts were a tangle of memory and realization. For years, he had worn his uniform like armor not just against enemies, but against change. He believed valor had a checklist age, rank, gender, blood spilled. He taught young soldiers to earn respect through sweat and scars. He believed in protocols, in order. But Amelia, that tiny girl with mismatched boots and unshakable calm, had shattered that doctrine with 3 perfect shots and a single moment of quiet defiance. Earlier, Ethan had watched Walter Dempsey, the once legendary sniper, whose photo still hung in the Hall of Valor, walk beside his granddaughter, as though she carried the weight of generations in her small hands. And now Ethan saw the truth. Walter hadn't trained a soldier. He had nurtured a spirit. Ethan sat down on the edge of the sandbags, running a calloused hand over his jaw. He remembered the faces of men he'd served with, brave, disciplined, but broken by the belief that only pain built warriors. They had never been taught what Amelia seemed to live so effortlessly, that strength could come from stillness, that courage wasn't always loud, and that dignity didn't come with stripes. A voice behind him stirred him from his thoughts. "Sergeant." It was Amelia. She held something in her hands, a folded piece of cloth. "My grandpa said you were one of the best back in the day," she said softly. "He used to talk about the guy who could shoot straight, but never shot without purpose." Ethan took the cloth. It was a hand-stitched armband, sewn in camo thread clearly made by Amelia herself. On it were embroidered 3 small words: honor, steady, heart. He swallowed hard. "You made this," she nodded. "For the people who remember what really matters." He looked at her not just as a child, but as a symbol of resilience, of hope, of what the next generation could be, if only given space to lead their own way. "You reminded me today," he said, voice hoarse, "why I joined in the first place." Then, without another word, Ethan rose, placed the armband on his sleeve above his sergeant's stripes, and gave her a crisp, solemn salute. It wasn't about rank anymore. It was about respect, earned not by age or authority, but by grace under pressure, and a girl who aimed for more than just a target. 2 days after the event at Hillside Base, Ethan McCall found an envelope slipped under his office door, no sender, no stamp, just his name written in tidy block letters. Inside was a typed letter on Department of Defense letterhead. It wasn't for him. It was for Amelia Dempsey. The letter extended a formal invitation to Amelia to attend a newly launched national initiative, Voices of Valor, a recognition program aimed at uplifting young Americans who had demonstrated exceptional courage, discipline, and civic values. The program, to be hosted in Washington, DPC, was backed by the Pentagon and a coalition of veterans organizations. Amelia's name topped the list. Ethan stood in silence, rereading the letter. His heart stirred with something between pride and disbelief. Later that afternoon, he met Walter and Amelia at the local diner. As the old veteran sipped black coffee and Amelia quietly colored with a stubby pencil, Ethan pulled out the letter and laid it on the table. Walter read it once, then twice, his eyes misting slightly. "Didn't think the government remembered old shooters like me?" he murmured. "They didn't," Ethan said. "They remembered the girl who reminded us what respect really means." Amelia looked up. "Do I have to go?" "You don't have to do anything," Walter said gently. "But sometimes, doing nothing lets someone else write the story for you." That night, the Hillside Base Auditorium opened its doors again, this time not for a demonstration, but a send-off. Veterans, cadets, and families gathered, candles flickering along the aisles. At the center stood Amelia, still wearing her patched-up camo, her grandfather's sniper badge pinned proudly to her chest. Ethan took the podium. He wasn't a man of speeches, but tonight, words found their way. Some people are born into legacy. Others create it from scratch, one steady breath at a time. He said, "Amelia Dempsey has done both." The crowd erupted in applause. As a surprise, Captain Reed presented Amelia with a small bronze statue, a girl kneeling in position, rifle resting calmly, eyes focused not on war, but on the horizon. Beneath it, the engraving read, "To those who aim with heart and hit something greater than a target." Amelia stepped forward, clutching the statue, and whispered into the mic, "Thank you, but this isn't just mine, it's ours." The room fell into hushed awe. In that moment, even the most hardened Marines in the back row blinked away tears. This wasn't just a send-off. It was a shift. From now on, the story of Hillside Base wouldn't be told in tales of medals and maneuvers, but in the legacy of a young girl who rewrote the meaning of courage with thread, patience, and a bulletproof soul. 2 months had passed since Amelia walked the halls of the Pentagon, shaking hands with generals and senators, her quiet confidence baffling everyone in the best way. News outlets ran her story with headlines like, "The girl who humbled the army," and "Precision, grace, and grit in one small soldier." But back in Hillside, Wyoming, things felt still. Until one afternoon, Sergeant Ethan McCall was called into a staff meeting he hadn't seen coming. A new mentorship initiative was being proposed, pairing senior veterans with promising youths in rural areas. The Department of Defense wanted it tested first at Hillside Base, and they had one name in mind to lead it. "Amelia Dempsey," the colonel announced, with oversight from Sergeant McCall. Ethan blinked. He wasn't used to sharing command, let alone with a child. But Amelia wasn't just a child anymore. Later that week, he met her at the range, no crowds, no cameras. Just the two of them under Wyoming's vast sky. She set up her rifle slowly, methodically, then turned to him. "Not here to shoot," she said. "I want to learn how to teach." Ethan smiled, a real one this time. "Then let me show you something no scope can see." They began working side by side. Ethan taught her how to read a recruit's fear by their breathing, how to speak without commanding, how to praise without inflating. Amelia, in turn, taught Ethan how to lead without lecturing, how to listen to those with no stripes, how to plant respect before expecting it. Word spread quickly. Soon, other bases began calling. Young cadets arrived from neighboring counties. Fathers brought their daughters. Grandmothers sat in folding chairs, clapping as their grandchildren hit moving targets not just with bullets, but with new belief. One weekend, Ethan brought out an old wooden crate, dusty, locked, and never opened since Kabul. Inside were medals, letters, and a photo of his own daughter, the one he lost years ago in a car crash, right before her 10th birthday. "I didn't know how to grieve," he told Amelia one morning. "So I trained soldiers instead and kept myself sharp, busy, cold." Amelia said nothing. She just sat beside him. "Sometimes," Ethan continued, "I think if she'd grown up, she might have been a lot like you." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them. He let them fall. That was growth. Not the medals, not the training, not even the redemption, but the surrender. The acceptance that strength isn't in holding back, it's in letting go. And in Hillside Base, under the summer sun, a hardened soldier and a girl in handmade camo forged a new kind of army. One where courage marched quietly, and respect wasn't barked, but earned. The following spring, something extraordinary happened at Hillside Base. A new structure was unveiled on the eastern edge of the training field, not a monument of war, but of wisdom. It wasn't tall or imposing. It stood barely 4 feet high, sculpted from reclaimed brass and walnut wood. At its center was the figure of a young girl crouched in a steady shooting stance, wearing a camo jacket stitched from mismatched fabrics. Her gaze, though cast in bronze, looked out with unwavering focus, not at a target, but at a horizon unseen. On the base, in delicate engraving, read, "To the girl who wore handmade camouflage and taught us how to aim for respect." Veterans, recruits, and families stood in solemn rows at the dedication ceremony. Birds circled overhead. Flags danced gently in the breeze. Sergeant Ethan McCall stood beside Amelia and Walter. He no longer wore his sunglasses. His eyes were clear, softened by months of purpose rediscovered. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped up, voice steady. "For most of my life," he said, "I believed courage came with calluses, and that respect had to be earned through endurance and rank. I thought small hands couldn't carry great weight." He turned slightly toward Amelia. "But then a girl in 2 big boots taught me something my war never did, that dignity can come in silence. That legacy isn't left behind, it's handed forward." The crowd grew quiet, some pressing tissues to their eyes. Walter spoke next, his voice rough like gravel but full of pride. "I've watched men break under pressure. I've seen war teach terrible things. But this is proof we can pass down something better." Amelia didn't give a speech. She simply approached the statue, took off the old patched-up camo jacket she always wore, the one stitched by her own hands, and draped it over the statue's shoulders. It was her way of saying goodbye, of recognizing that the lessons had left her and now belonged to everyone. The applause didn't erupt. It rose slowly, like a wave, people standing not out of obligation but reverence. From Washington to Wyoming, people began writing letters. Schools started programs in Amelia's name, and the mentorship initiative launched at Hillside spread to dozens of rural bases across the country. As for Ethan, he didn't retire. He re-enlisted not for combat, but to lead what he called the Quiet Battalion, a team of veterans who trained young minds to balance strength with empathy, action with reflection. He no longer carried a rifle. He carried stories. And Amelia, she kept growing, teaching, listening, not chasing rank or recognition, but legacy. A legacy built not on war, but on worth. And in that quiet corner of Hillside Base, where wind brushed against bronze, generations would gather for years to come, not to learn how to shoot, but to learn how to see. In a world rushing to speak, Amelia reminded us of the power of quiet strength. She didn't shout to be heard, she stood still and let her actions echo. What began as a simple question, "May I try?" became a movement of dignity, courage, and grace. And through her, Ethan rediscovered something he thought he'd buried with the war, the belief that true leadership listens first and acts with heart. Because in the end, respect isn't worn like a badge. It's earned not with louder voices, but with steadier hands and purpose aimed true. If this story moved something in you, maybe a memory of a grandparent's quiet wisdom, or the strength of a child who reminded you what truly matters, don't let it end here. Tell us in the comments who taught you the meaning of respect. Subscribe for more stories that speak softly, but stay loud in the heart. Like if you believe courage isn't about age, it's about character. Share this with someone who needs a reminder. Sometimes, the smallest voices teach the biggest lessons. Because legacy doesn't start someday. It starts now with us.